It rests on every table, an unassuming crystal, a simple seasoning. We scatter it without a second thought, yet its power stretches back through human history, igniting empires and fueling brutal conflict. For millennia, this very substance, common salt, was a resource more precious than gold, a vital cornerstone of survival. From the sun-baked salt pans of ancient river deltas and windswept coastal shores, men have spilled their blood and sacrificed armies to control it. This white gold, essential for preserving food and sustaining life, became a coveted currency, a potent weapon, and a prize for which nations would rise and fall. We journey now into a forgotten history, uncovering the unseen battles and the quiet struggles where a single grain of salt could determine the fate of millions, shaping the world in ways we rarely comprehend. These are the forgotten wars fought over salt. The human body craves salt, a fundamental need etched into our very biology. Without it, life itself falters. For early humans, this vital mineral is not merely a craving but a constant pursuit. They follow herds to natural salt licks, observing how animals instinctively seek out the white crystals essential for their survival. This primal knowledge quickly translates into organized human quest. As communities grow and societies emerge, the search for salt intensifies. It becomes clear that reliable access to this substance is not just a matter of taste, but of life and death, of power and prosperity. Before the advent of refrigeration, salt stands as the sole reliable method for preserving food. Fish caught far from shore can be gutted and brined. Meats from a successful hunt, too abundant for immediate consumption, can be salted and stored for lean months. This simple act transforms human survival. It allows populations to grow beyond immediate capacity of their hunting grounds or agricultural cycles. It enables armies to march for weeks, sustained by rations that would otherwise spoil, and fuels voyages across vast oceans, ensuring sailors do not starve on long expeditions. The ability to preserve food means communities can accumulate resources, can plan for the future, can survive harsh winters and unexpected famines. It gives rise to the very idea of surplus, transforming precarious subsistence living into something more stable and predictable. It allows for specialization of labor, for the development of crafts and trades, for the foundations of complex civilization to take root and flourish. Without salt, human endeavor remains dramatically constrained, tethered to perishable limits of nature. But salt is not uniformly distributed across the earth. It collects in specific places: sun-baked coastal pans where seawater evaporates, arid inland lakes that shrink to leave crystalline deposits, deep underground mines where ancient seas have receded. Obtaining it is often arduous, demanding great labor and ingenuity. Hauling heavy salt blocks or refined crystals over long distances becomes a major economic activity, defining early trade routes and shaping wealth across continents. The journey, fraught with danger from bandits to treacherous terrain, further increases salt's value upon arrival. Along these routes, salt itself often serves as currency. In many ancient societies, it is so valuable that workers are paid not in coin, but in portions of salt, a practice reflected in the very etymology of our words. The Roman soldier's salary, a salarium, is literally a payment in salt or the means to buy it. This term gives us our modern word, salary, a testament to salt's deep historical importance in commerce and compensation, a legacy often forgotten today. The sheer value of salt fuels early economic systems, driving innovation and expansion. Merchants brave harsh landscapes and dangerous territories, their caravans laden with precious white crystals, a cargo more valuable than metal. Control over a salt mine, a brine spring, or even a strategic stretch of coast where salt can be harvested becomes a source of immense power. Without salt, their populations weaken and their empires falter. This understanding spawns the first great white gold rushes, long before the actual gold rushes. People flock to salt-rich regions, eager to exploit this invaluable resource, forming bustling settlements and cities around salt pans and mine entrances, their prosperity tied to the crystalline treasure beneath or around them. The earliest known salt works, dating back thousands of years, reveal sophisticated techniques for extraction and refinement. In ancient China, for example, the industry is already highly developed by the second millennium before Common Era, with deep wells drilled to extract brine. The state quickly recognizes salt as a critical strategic asset. Monopoly over salt production and distribution becomes a cornerstone of imperial power, funding vast public works and massive armies. The famed salt and iron debates of the Han Dynasty illustrate centuries of struggle over state control versus private enterprise in this vital industry. To the emperors, control of salt is nothing less than control of the populace, a tool for both sustenance and subjugation. In ancient Egypt, salt is not only a food preservative but also a crucial component of religious rituals, essential for mummification and the journey to the afterlife. The Egyptians harvest salt from the arid desert lakes and the Red Sea coast, and their extensive trade routes extend far and wide, exchanging salt for other commodities across the ancient Near East. Their elaborate tomb paintings sometimes depict offerings of salt, elevating its status to a sacred substance. The pharaohs jealously guard their access to these precious salt sources, understanding their dual importance for both the living and the dead, for their economy and their spiritual beliefs. The Celtic peoples of prehistoric Europe develop extensive salt mining operations, particularly in regions like Hallstatt in modern-day Austria. Here, miners extract salt deep within the mountains, using sophisticated tools and techniques for their time. The wealth generated from these salt mines fuels the Hallstatt culture, enabling it to become a dominant force in Central Europe, establishing far-reaching trade networks for their prized commodity, shaping regional power dynamics. Their settlement's prosperity is predicated on the availability and control of this white gold. The Roman Empire, renowned for its vast infrastructure and logistical prowess, deeply understands the strategic importance of salt. Its famous roads, often built for military movements, often trace ancient salt routes. For example, the Via Salaria, their salt road, connecting coastal salt pans at Ostia to central Italy's Sabine country. This road is not just a path for commerce, but a vital lifeline for the legions, ensuring their strength and allowing them to project power across vast domains. Roman expansion often targets regions with valuable salt resources, recognizing control of salt as synonymous with control of economy and populace. The Romans developed massive saltworks, employing thousands, and implement complex systems of taxation and distribution, further solidifying the state's grip on this vital commodity, weaving it into their imperial control. From the high plains of the Andes where indigenous peoples harvest salt from ancient lake beds, to the coastal communities of Africa who gather salt from tidal pools, the story is consistent. Those who possess salt and control its source and trade hold significant power. This power is not merely economic, it is fundamentally geopolitical. Access to salt determines the strength of an army, the health of a population, and the stability of an empire. The quest for salt shapes borders, ignites exploration, fuels innovation. Entire communities migrate in search of new sources when old ones are depleted. Wars are fought not for gold or jewels, but for barren stretches of land that yield crystalline deposits, or for control over a crucial stretch of river that allows transport. The strategic value of salt makes it a constant point of contention, a silent trigger for conflict throughout the ancient world. It is a commodity so indispensable that nations risk everything to secure it, to protect their access, or to deny it to their rivals. This foundational period, where salt transforms from a biological necessity into an economic engine and strategic weapon, lays the groundwork for centuries of struggle. The white gold rush is not a fleeting phenomenon but an enduring reality, setting the stage for dramatic conflicts that redefine maps and reshape destinies. Empires rise and fall, their fates often tied to invisible threads of power. One such thread, woven into the very fabric of ancient governance, is salt. It is no longer just a commodity but a tool of statecraft, a strategic lever that determines who rules and who serves, who prospers and who struggles. From the first sprawling civilizations, leaders quickly grasp its profound implications. They understand that controlling salt means controlling life itself, and with it, the obedience of their populace and the strength of their armies. In the sun-baked lands of ancient Egypt, a clear hierarchy emerges around salt. The pharaohs, seen as divine rulers, claim dominion over all natural resources, including the vast salt flats of Wadi el-Natrun or the Red Sea coast. Laborers, often forced into service, toil under a relentless sun, extracting the precious crystals. This salt serves not merely as a seasoning but as the essential ingredient for mummification, a sacred rite that preserves the elite for the afterlife. It is a state monopoly, its production and distribution meticulously managed by scribes and officials. Control of salt becomes interwoven with religious practice and the very legitimacy of the throne. Without a steady supply, the embalming rituals that secure a pharaoh's immortality cannot proceed. This creates an early profound link between salt, power, and the divine right to rule. Further east, in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, the challenge is different. While some salt can be harvested from marshy areas or evaporation ponds, the mighty Tigris and Euphrates rivers, crucial for irrigation, also bring dissolved salts that accumulate in the soil, eventually rendering fields infertile. This constant threat of salinization highlights the paradox of salt, essential for life, yet in excess destructive to agriculture. The powerful city-states and later empires of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria understand the critical need for uncontaminated salt sources and the importance of trade networks to acquire it. They fight to control the river routes and desert paths that bring vital goods, including salt, from distant mountains or coastal regions. Armies are provisioned with salted meat and fish, allowing them to march further and sustain longer campaigns, an early example of how salt directly fuels military might. Control over these networks translates directly into economic power and military advantage. The kings who secure these supplies secure their empires. As societies grow more complex, the state's grip on salt tightens. It becomes a critical source of revenue, taxed heavily, and its trade regulated with an iron fist. The ability to levy salt taxes funds monumental construction projects, maintains vast bureaucracies, and equips standing armies. This economic engine of salt drives expansion and consolidation of power. Perhaps no empire demonstrates this more vividly than Rome. The very word for salary, salarium, derives from the payment given to Roman soldiers, often in salt or money to buy it. This practical necessity underscores salt's immense value to military operations. A legion on campaign needs salted provisions to prevent spoilage, ensuring sustenance over long marches and extended sieges. Without it, a powerful army quickly becomes a starving, weakened force. The Romans build elaborate roads not just for legions but for commerce, and one of the most famous is the Via Salaria, the Salt Way. This ancient road, stretching from the salt pans at Ostia on the Tyrrhenian coast, east across the Apennine Mountains to the Sabine region, exists primarily to transport this precious commodity to the interior. Control of this artery is paramount, a constant concern for governors and generals. Raids on salt caravans or attempts to cut off access to the coastal saltworks are acts of economic warfare, direct challenges to Roman authority and stability. The expansion of the Roman Empire into salt-producing regions of Italy and beyond is not accidental. It is a calculated strategy to secure vital resources and deny them to potential rivals. Salt forms the bedrock of Roman logistical power, shaping its military strategies and its enduring imperial reach. Thousands of miles to the east, ancient China provides an even more striking example of state control over salt. For centuries, Chinese emperors recognized salt as a fundamental pillar of national strength. From the 3rd century BCE, during the Qin dynasty, and especially under the Han Dynasty, the imperial government establishes a formal state monopoly on salt production and distribution. This move is revolutionary, transforming salt from a privately traded good into a direct instrument of imperial finance. Huge state-run enterprises manage salt marshes along the coast and innovative salt wells in Sichuan, some reaching hundreds of meters deep, employing thousands of workers. Taxes on salt generate enormous revenues, funding the construction of the Great Wall, massive irrigation projects, and perhaps most importantly, perpetual wars. The Han Dynasty, for example, largely finances its prolonged and costly wars against the nomadic Xiongnu tribes through the salt monopoly. By controlling the supply and price, the emperor can manipulate the economy, reward loyalists, and punish dissenters. Attempts to evade the monopoly, through smuggling or illegal production, are met with severe penalties including death. The history of Imperial China is punctuated by debates, reforms and conflicts centered on the salt monopoly. It becomes a litmus test for good governance, a source of immense wealth, but also a breeding ground for corruption and popular discontent when prices soar. Yet, its strategic importance never diminishes. The state's power to wage war, to maintain order, and to project influence directly hinges on its iron grip over salt. The desire for salt, therefore, evolves beyond mere acquisition. It becomes a powerful impetus for conflict. Empires fight to protect their existing salt sources, whether coastal evaporation ponds, inland mines, or saline springs. These territories are fiercely defended, their ownership a constant point of contention with neighboring tribes or rival kingdoms. They fight to control the trade routes, the rivers, the passes, and the ports through which salt travels. These logistical lifelines are vulnerable, and their mastery grants immense strategic advantage, allowing an empire to provision its own population and armies while simultaneously denying this critical resource to its enemies. Economic warfare takes a potent form when salt is weaponized. Sieges often aim to starve a city not just of food, but specifically of salt, knowing that without it, food spoils, health deteriorates, and morale plummets. A population denied salt cannot long endure. Thus, throughout the ancient world, salt is not merely a common mineral. It is a strategic commodity, a source of unparalleled power, and a silent, often forgotten, trigger for some of history's most defining conflicts. Its control shapes the very structure of early states, dictating their economic policies, influencing their military campaigns, and ultimately determining the rise and fall of civilizations. The white gold rush is not a fleeting phenomenon but an enduring reality, setting the stage for dramatic conflicts that redefine maps and reshape destinies. The pursuit of this essential crystal lays bare the intricate connections between natural resources, governance, and the relentless drive for dominance. The relentless drive for dominance often manifests in direct conflict over vital resources. When salt transforms from a mere condiment into a strategic necessity, its sources become battlefields. The very ground from which this white gold emerges, the shimmering salt pans, the subterranean mines, the brackish estuaries, turns into a prize worth fighting for, shaping borders and spilling blood across centuries. Consider the ancient world, where access to salt is not merely a convenience but a matter of survival. Civilizations rise and fall based on their ability to secure and control this fundamental resource. In what is now modern China, the earliest conflicts over salt date back millennia. The vast salt marshes and inland lakes, rich with saline deposits, are fiercely contested. Dynasties understand that control of salt production and distribution empowers the state, funding armies and ensuring the loyalty of its populace. The salt and iron monopolies established during the Han Dynasty exemplify this principle. Here the state does not just tax salt, it owns the means of its production. This policy ignites intense political debates and occasionally open rebellions, as powerful merchant families and local lords resist the centralized control over such a lucrative commodity. The struggle is not simply economic, It is a fundamental clash over power, over who dictates the lifeblood of the empire. Further west, the Roman Empire, a sprawling entity built on military might and sophisticated infrastructure, also understands the strategic importance of salt. The fabled Via Salaria, the Salt Road, is not just a trade route. It is a testament to Rome's determination to secure its salt supply. From the Adriatic coast, where salt is harvested from tidal flats, this ancient artery snakes inland, ensuring that legions are provisioned and the growing empire's heartland remains strong. The very word salary originates from the Latin salarium, the payment made to Roman soldiers, often in the form of salt or an allowance to buy it. When enemies threaten these vital supply lines, Rome responds with overwhelming force. Protecting its salt sources and routes is paramount, a non-negotiable aspect of its imperial strategy. Battles are fought, territories are annexed, all to maintain the flow of this crucial mineral. Moving into the medieval era, the story of salt wars intensifies, especially across the Mediterranean. The maritime republics of Venice and Genoa, fierce rivals for trade supremacy, clash repeatedly over control of key salt-producing regions. Venice, the Serene Republic, builds its immense wealth and naval power largely on its monopoly of salt. It controls the vast salt pans of Chioggia and those across the Adriatic, leveraging this control to dominate trade routes and dictate terms to lesser states. Its galleys do not just carry spices and silks, they are laden with salt, a commodity more valuable than gold in some markets. Genoa challenges this dominance, seeking its own access to salt supplies, leading to naval skirmishes and full-scale wars. The War of Chioggia, a brutal conflict in the late 14th century, sees these two titans battle directly over control of Venice's primary salt works. For Venice, losing Chioggia means losing its salt, its wealth, and its very identity as a trading power. The stakes are existential. Across the vast Sahara Desert, another form of salt war unfolds. For centuries, the Todeni salt mine in present-day Mali serves as a crucial hub for the trans-Saharan trade. Caravans of camels, sometimes thousands strong, traverse unforgiving landscapes, risking sandstorms and banditry, all to transport slabs of rock salt carved from the ancient lakebed. Control of Todeni and the arduous routes leading to it means immense power and wealth. Empires like the Ghana, Mali, and Songhai understand this intimately. They fight to control not just the salt itself but the trade routes, the oasis towns, and the people who toil in the brutal mines. The Tuareg people, masters of the desert, often serve as guardians and transporters, their livelihood inextricably linked to this white gold. Raids and conflicts over these salt routes are common, an enduring feature of the desert's harsh geopolitics. The scramble for salt is not confined to antiquity or the medieval period. It persists into the modern age, shaping revolutions and igniting national consciousness. In the Indian subcontinent, the British East India Company, and later the British Raj, imposes a highly oppressive salt tax. This tax does not just generate revenue, it asserts imperial control over a fundamental necessity of Indian life. The poor suffer disproportionately, unable to afford the heavily taxed salt, while traditional salt production is suppressed to protect British monopolies. This oppressive policy becomes a potent symbol of colonial exploitation. Mahatma Gandhi, recognizing the profound injustice and the unifying power of salt, launches the iconic Salt March in 1930. He defies British law by walking to the sea and making salt from its waters, an act of civil disobedience that galvanizes millions and ignites the independence movement. The British respond with arrests and violence, but the movement, fueled by the everyday need for salt, proves unstoppable. It is a war of wills, fought not with guns, but with principles and a simple, vital mineral. Even in the relatively recent past, during the American Civil War, salt plays a critical, often overlooked, role in the conflict. The Confederate States, largely agrarian and lacking significant industrial infrastructure, find themselves desperately short of salt. The The Union blockade starves the South of imported salt, while Northern forces systematically target and destroy Confederate salt works along the Atlantic coast and in inland areas. The salt mines of Louisiana, the salt springs of Virginia, and the coastal evaporation pans become strategic targets. Without salt, food preservation becomes impossible, meat spoils, and the health of both soldiers and civilians deteriorates rapidly. The Confederacy dedicates significant resources to finding and protecting new salt sources, even resorting to boiling seawater and digging up saline earth. The struggle for salt is a constant, grinding battle on the home front, directly impacting the Confederacy's ability to feed its troops and sustain its war effort. It is a war waged not just on battlefields, but in kitchens and supply depots, with salt as the silent, essential prize. These conflicts, spanning continents and millennia, underscore a profound truth. Control over salt is control over life itself. The shimmering surfaces of salt pans, the dark depths of mines, and the winding paths of ancient trade routes are not merely geographical features. They are testament to humanity's enduring struggle for survival, for power, and for the fundamental resources that dictate the course of history. The brine of the earth, once a simple solution, becomes a potent symbol of dominion, often stained with the blood of those who fought to possess it. The wars for salt are not tales of conquest driven by ego alone, but by the stark, undeniable reality of human need and the relentless pursuit of strategic advantage. They are a forgotten chapter, yet their echoes resonate through the ages, reminding us that the most elemental substances often carry the heaviest weight in the scales of power and conflict. The unassuming white crystal continues to shape destinies, just as it always has. Its silent power, though often unseen, remains a potent force in the geopolitical landscape, determining who thrives and who falters, who commands and who is commanded. The echoes of these conflicts serve as a stark reminder of salt's enduring legacy as a catalyst for both survival and strife. The driving force of salt, essential for life itself, compels ancient peoples to forge pathways across continents and oceans. These intricate arteries of commerce, born of necessity, soon become arteries of conflict. They are the salt roads, vast networks that crisscross the globe, carved by human endeavor to distribute one of Earth's most precious commodities. But where there is immense value, there is also intense desire, and what begins as a route for trade often transforms into a battleground for dominion. Across the vastness of the Sahara, the shimmering sands hold untold stories of these struggles. For millennia, caravans of camels traverse unforgiving landscapes, laden with blocks of salt hewn from ancient seabeds like Tagaza and Todeni. These are not merely trade routes. They are lifelines connecting the salt-rich north to the gold-rich kingdoms of the south. The empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai understand this intimately. Control of the salt mines and the passages to them means control of wealth and power. It is a constant game of strategy and force. Berber tribes, nomadic and resilient, often guard these routes, sometimes facilitating trade, sometimes raiding to seize the invaluable cargo. Their skirmishes across the dunes are not random acts of violence, but calculated bids for a share in the salt wealth, a brutal dance of survival played out under the scorching sun. The very survival of entire populations depends on this movement of salt, making the security of these roads paramount, and their vulnerability a constant threat. In the medieval heart of Europe, the story is no less dramatic. The Hanseatic League, a powerful confederation of merchant guilds and market towns, rises to prominence largely on the strength of salt. Lüneburg, with its vast underground salt domes, becomes a powerhouse, its white gold fueling the burgeoning economies of the Baltic. The herring fisheries of Scania, vital for feeding a growing populace, rely entirely on Lüneburg salt for preservation. Control over the salt trade routes across northern Europe is not merely economic advantage, it is strategic dominance. Rivals seek to disrupt these flows, block passages and impose their own levies. Fortified castles dot the rivers and roads, not just to protect territories, but to control the movement of goods, especially salt. Local lords often wage small wars, not for vast tracts of land, but for a toll point, a river crossing, a strategic bottleneck on a salt road that can extract tribute from every passing caravan or barge. These are localized conflicts, yet their cumulative impact shapes the political landscape, defining who prospers and who falters. Further south, the Mediterranean becomes a canvas for grander struggles over salt. Venice, the serene republic, builds an empire on maritime trade, and salt is its cornerstone. The Venetians meticulously control salt production and distribution across the Adriatic, leveraging their naval supremacy to secure monopolies. Genoa, their fierce rival, constantly challenges this dominance. The wars between Venice and Genoa in the 13th and 14th centuries are epical naval engagements, fought not just for glory or territory, but for control of the seas and the lucrative trade routes that carry salt. The right to harvest salt in the lagoons of Servia or to transport it from the shores of Cyprus is a prize worth fighting for, leading to devastating naval battles that decide the fate of entire fleets and the economic future of powerful city-states. The ebb and flow of these conflicts directly impacts the availability and price of salt, touching the lives of ordinary people far removed from the grandeur of naval warfare. The British Empire, in its relentless expansion, also understands the strategic importance of salt. In India, the infamous salt tax becomes a symbol of colonial oppression. Britain seizes control of India's vast salt production, imposing high taxes and strict monopolies that cripple local industries and force Indians to buy expensive, often imported, British salt. This economic subjugation is not merely a revenue-generating scheme. It is a deliberate strategy to exert total control over a fundamental resource. The journey of salt from coastal pans to inland markets is monitored, regulated, and often policed by force. The salt marches led by Mahatma Gandhi are not just acts of civil disobedience. They are direct challenges to this imperial control over salt roads, a powerful assertion of a people's right to their own resources. The subsequent clashes, though often non-violent on the Indian side, reveal the brutal lengths to which the empire goes to maintain its grip on this essential commodity. Even in the Americas, long before European arrival, the struggle for salt shapes indigenous societies. From the salt lakes of the Great Basin to the underground mines of the Andes, pre-Columbian cultures develop intricate trade networks. The Chaco Canyon civilization, for example, establishes complex routes for various goods, and salt is among them, moving from distant sources to population centers. Conflict inevitably arises over access to these vital supplies. Archaeological evidence suggests that control over salt sources and trade paths is a significant factor in territorial disputes and intertribal warfare. The securing of a steady salt supply is not a luxury, it is a military and strategic imperative for any thriving community. The salt roads are thus more than just pathways. They are lines drawn in the sand, on the water, and across mountains, defining spheres of influence and igniting the fires of conflict. The history of humanity is, in part, a history of these struggles. From ancient China, where control of salt mines and the Grand Canal salt transport routes fuels imperial power and peasant rebellions, to the present day, where access to vital resources continues to drive geopolitical tension, salt remains a silent, yet potent, protagonist. The wars over salt are not often celebrated in epic poems or grand narratives, but their impact on civilizations, on the rise and fall of empires, and on the daily lives of countless individuals, is undeniable. These trade routes, initially symbols of cooperation and survival, constantly remind us how easily necessity can transform into a cause for violent contention, forever etching the story of salt into the very fabric of human conflict. The path of salt is indeed often paved with the very blood it once helped to preserve. Yet, the very essence of salt, its irreplaceable value, also makes it a dangerous commodity. For centuries, governments across continents recognize its power, transforming a vital nutrient into an iron fist of state control and an unparalleled engine of revenue. This is the era of the salt monopoly, a system designed to extract wealth from every citizen, from the wealthiest merchant to the poorest peasant. It is a system that inevitably breeds resentment, resistance, and ultimately rebellion. The logic is simple. Salt is a necessity for life itself. It preserves food, flavors meals, and maintains health. No one can live without it. By controlling its production, distribution, and sale, a government secures an immutable source of income, insulated from the whims of harvest or trade fluctuations. The state becomes the sole provider, dictating prices and exacting heavy taxes, a practice known as the gabelle in some parts of the world. Ancient China stands as a stark testament to the power and peril of the salt monopoly. As early as the Han Dynasty, more than 2,000 years ago, emperors nationalized the salt and iron industries. The motivation is clear: to fund ambitious public works projects, expand the empire, and maintain a formidable military. The salt gabelle, a state monopoly on salt production and sale, becomes a cornerstone of imperial finance, often accounting for half or more of the national revenue. Under this system, private salt production is outlawed. Government agents control the brine wells, the salt lakes, and the coastal evaporation pans. They manage the transportation and distribution, selling salt at inflated prices through state-licensed merchants. For the vast peasant population, salt, once freely gathered or cheaply purchased, now carries an exorbitant price tag. It transforms from a natural resource into a burden, a constant drain on meager family incomes. The economic pressure is immense. A peasant family might spend a significant portion of its annual earnings just to buy enough salt to preserve food and sustain themselves. The choice often comes down to paying for salt or risking starvation and illness. This desperation fuels a clandestine economy. Smuggling becomes widespread, a dangerous but necessary act of survival. Those caught in the illegal salt trade face brutal punishments. Confiscation of property, forced labor, even execution are common deterrents. Yet the stakes are so high that millions choose the life of a salt smuggler or salt bandit, as they are often called. These groups, operating outside the law, often grow into powerful, organized forces, challenging state authority in the countryside. The Tang Dynasty, a golden age of Chinese culture and power, provides one of the most vivid examples of the salt gabelle's devastating impact. By the 8th century, the central government relies heavily on salt revenues. Mismanagement, corruption, and an ever-increasing demand for funds lead to ever higher salt prices. The burden on the common people becomes intolerable. In the mid-9th century, this simmering discontent boils over. The Huangqiao Rebellion, one of the most destructive peasant uprisings in Chinese history, finds its origins and much of its early strength among salt smugglers. Huangqiao himself is said to have been a salt merchant who failed his civil service examination and turned to the illicit trade. His followers, impoverished peasants, disgruntled soldiers, and desperate smugglers, rally under his banner, driven by a deep-seated hatred for the imperial gabelle and the officials who enforce it. The rebellion sweeps across China, devastating cities and leaving millions dead. It profoundly weakens the Tang Dynasty, setting the stage for its eventual collapse. The story of the Huangqiao Rebellion is a brutal reminder that even a seemingly innocuous commodity like salt can ignite the flames of revolution when wielded as an instrument of oppression. The phenomenon is not confined to China. Across Eurasia, from ancient Rome to the empires of India, rulers recognize salt's fiscal potential. While not always a complete monopoly on the scale of China's gabelle, taxes on salt, tolls on its transport, or state control over key mines are common. These measures consistently generate resentment among the populace, though often less organized than the Great Chinese uprisings. In medieval and early modern Europe, the gabelle takes root with particular severity in France. First formally instituted in the 13th century, the French salt tax evolves into one of the most complex and hated levies in the kingdom. Its application is notoriously uneven, creating a patchwork of regions with vastly different salt prices. The Great Gabelle provinces, primarily in the north and center of France, bear the heaviest burden. Here, every individual over the age of 8 is legally required to purchase a minimum amount of salt each year, regardless of their actual need or ability to pay. This is the dreaded sel de devoir or duty salt. The price is fixed at an exorbitant rate, often 50 times its production cost. In contrast, other provinces, the redemption countries, had bought their way out of the Gabelle centuries earlier with a one-time payment. Still others, the free countries like Brittany, benefit from historic exemptions due to their coastal salt marshes. This geographical disparity fuels enormous resentment. A pound of salt might cost 40 times more just a few miles away, across an invisible border defined by historical tax policies. The temptation for smuggling is overwhelming. Thousands of faux sonneurs or false salters risk their lives transporting salt from free or low-tax regions into high Gabelle areas. The penalties for these crimes are draconian. A first offense might mean flogging and branding. Repeated offenses could lead to galley slavery for men or for women, imprisonment and often hair shaving as a mark of shame. Death is a real possibility for those caught armed or resisting arrest. The Gabelle requires a vast and costly apparatus to enforce. A special gendarmerie, the Gabellis, patrols the internal customs borders, hunting smugglers and inspecting every cart and cargo. Their presence is a constant reminder of the state's intrusive power and the inequities of the system. Justice is swift and harsh, meted out by special Gabelle courts. Between the mid-17th and mid-18th centuries, thousands are sentenced to the galleys or executed for salt-related offenses. The salt Gabelle is not merely an economic burden. It is a symbol of absolute monarchy's arbitrary power and disregard for the common people. Its unequal application, its mandatory purchase clauses, and its brutal enforcement make it a prime target for popular outrage. Along with other hated taxes like the taille and the corvée, the Gabelle becomes a potent rallying cry for revolution. During the French Revolution, the abolition of the Gabelle is one of the very first demands of the Third Estate. When the Bastille falls in 1789, the people of Paris immediately turn their fury not only on the fortress itself, but also on the customs houses where the hated Gabellists collect their taxes. The Gabelle is formally abolished in 1790, a moment of profound liberation for millions who had lived under its shadow for centuries. Its demise signals a fundamental shift in the relationship between the state and its citizens, born from the bitter struggles over a single, essential mineral. The story of salt taxation is a recurring motif throughout history, a testament to the enduring human struggle against economic oppression. From the arid plains where ancient civilizations first recognized its value, to the bustling markets of medieval Europe, salt stands as more than a mere seasoning. It is a commodity infused with power, a currency of survival and often, a trigger for devastating conflict. These rebellions, born of necessity and desperation, are not romanticized conquests. They are visceral struggles for basic dignity and economic justice. They remind us that the wars fought over salt are not always armies clashing on battlefields. Often they are silent wars fought in the kitchens and fields of ordinary people, against a distant, unseen enemy, the state itself reaching into every household, demanding its share of this most vital ingredient. The shadow of the salt Gabelle, whether Chinese or French, stretches long through history. It reveals how the control of fundamental resources can be weaponized, turning a source of life into an instrument of death, and a foundation of empire into the catalyst for its downfall. The legacy of these forgotten wars is etched not in grand monuments, but in the untold suffering of generations, a stark reminder of the price humanity pays for the preservation of power. The cost of power, we have seen, is paid in blood and suffering. But beneath the grand narratives of empires and rebellions, a quieter, more insidious battle unfolds within the human body itself. This is the realm where salt, the very essence of life, becomes a silent scourge, a double-edged sword that sustains and often destroys. Life on Earth begins in saline water, a fundamental truth echoed in the salty composition of human blood, sweat, and tears. Sodium chloride, common salt, is not merely a flavor enhancer. It is an indispensable mineral, a cornerstone of our very existence, fundamental to our physiological architecture. Our bodies do not produce salt. They must acquire it from the external world, constantly consuming and excreting, striving to maintain a delicate electrolyte balance. This intricate equilibrium of sodium and potassium ions underpins every vital function. The transmission of nerve impulses, the contraction of every muscle fiber, the delicate regulation of fluid levels both inside and outside our cells, and the absorption of nutrients in our digestive system. Without this precise balance, the intricate machinery of life grinds to a halt, leading to cascade failures across all bodily systems. Imagine a world where salt is not just scarce, but almost entirely absent from the immediate environment. For much of human history, particularly in inland regions far removed from oceanic trade or natural salt deposits, this was a stark reality for countless communities. In these forgotten corners, the silent scourge of salt deficiency or hyponatremia manifests not as a sudden cataclysm but as a slow, insidious, and debilitating decay of the human spirit and body. The most immediate signs often appear in the muscles. They begin to cramp, racked by involuntary spasms as vital nerve signals falter. The mind clouds. Concentration wanes, replaced by an unsettling lethargy, a profound mental fatigue, and a creeping confusion that disorients. Headaches begin to throb, a persistent, dull drumbeat of distress signaling a deeper systemic imbalance. As the body's sodium levels plummet further, fluid regulation collapses. Without adequate sodium to maintain osmotic pressure, cells swell with uncontrolled water intake. This is particularly dangerous for brain cells, where swelling can lead to cerebral edema, increasing intracranial pressure, causing severe neurological dysfunction, seizures, and ultimately coma and death. Historically, this invisible enemy has stalked those pushing the boundaries of survival. Armies marching across vast arid landscapes enduring long campaigns would have seen their ranks thinned not just by enemy blades but by the silent onset of electrolyte imbalance. Explorers venturing into unknown territories, deprived of salt for weeks or months, describe overwhelming fatigue and mental deterioration. Communities enduring prolonged sieges, cut off from all supply lines, faced a slow demise exacerbated by the lack of this basic mineral. The Roman legionary's salarium, his salt allowance, was not a mere perk. It was a crucial, non-negotiable provision, a profound recognition of salt's absolute role in maintaining the strength and endurance necessary for conquest. It underscores how empires understood salt as foundational to military might. Beyond military contexts, the earliest and most vital trade routes often followed veins of salt, from Sahara caravans transporting blocks of rock salt to European salt roads. Their very existence was dictated by the desperate human need for this vital compound. The desire for salt drove vast migrations, shaped entire economies, and sometimes sparked conflicts on a microscale, as local communities battled over access to precious salt pans, brine springs, or trade networks. Animals, too, instinctively seek salt, their migration sometimes dictated by the availability of salt licks. A farmer knows that livestock without adequate salt grows weak, becomes infertile, and eventually perishes, mirroring the human experience of deprivation. In traditional agricultural societies, where diets often consisted of bland grains and vegetables, supplemented by limited meat, the constant quest for dietary salt was a daily struggle, a silent pressure that informed culinary practices and communal rituals. Salt was sprinkled not just for taste but for survival. Yet, salt's essential role extends far beyond direct bodily functions. For millennia, it stood as the primary preservative, the unyielding guardian against decay in a world utterly devoid of refrigeration. Before modern chilling technologies, the ability of salt to draw out moisture and inhibit microbial growth was nothing short of miraculous. It transformed highly perishable goods into stable, transportable stores, enabling extended maritime journeys, feeding vast armies, and sustaining burgeoning urban populations far from their agricultural food sources. Fish caught in the oceans could be heavily salted, dried, and transported inland, becoming an indispensable protein source for landlocked communities. Meat from seasonal hunts could be cured and smoked, transforming fleeting abundance into year-round sustenance, providing crucial calories. Vegetables, too, could be fermented and preserved in brine, locking in vital nutrients to see communities through long winters when fresh produce was unobtainable. This simple mineral, in its preserving power, was a foundational pillar of human civilization, allowing societies to grow beyond mere subsistence. This transformative power of salt, while ensuring survival and fostering civilization, also inadvertently reshaped human diets. For centuries, a significant portion of the global population consumed substantial amounts of salt, not out of choice for flavor, but out of necessity for preservation. Smoked and salted meats, pickled vegetables, brined fish, and preserved cheeses formed the bedrock of many traditional cuisines. While these methods prevented starvation and spoilage, they introduced consistently high levels of sodium into the daily intake, levels that, while perhaps tolerated by bodies accustomed to active, labor-intensive lives and often limited access to fresh water, laid the groundwork for future health challenges. The dynamic shifts dramatically and irrevocably with the Industrial Revolution. Salt, once a precious commodity fought over by kings and empires, becomes abundantly available and remarkably cheap. Industrial-scale mining and production techniques flood the global market, effectively removing the ancient scarcity that had so profoundly shaped human history, economy, and conflict. Simultaneously, food production undergoes its own parallel revolution. Processed foods emerge, meticulously engineered for convenience, extended shelf life, and broad mass appeal, designed to feed a rapidly urbanizing populace. And within these new culinary landscapes, salt assumes an entirely new, multifaceted role. It is no longer solely a life-saving preserver, nor a scarce, treasured resource. Instead, it becomes a ubiquitous flavor enhancer, a critical texture modifier, and a highly cost-effective ingredient that boosts palatability, masking less desirable flavors and encouraging greater consumption. Its presence becomes almost unavoidable in the modern food chain. Suddenly, the silent scourge takes on a new, insidious guise. Humanity, having battled for millennia against the debilitating effects of salt deficiency, now confronts the perilous opposite extreme, a silent epidemic of excess. The modern diet, a landscape saturated with packaged snacks, ready meals, fast food, and a vast array of highly processed ingredients, often delivers a daily sodium intake that far exceeds our physiological needs. This overconsumption is not always deliberate. Salt is hidden in countless products, making mindful eating a constant challenge. The consequences of this pervasive overconsumption, though often slow, invisible, and manifesting over decades, are profound, widespread, and devastating to public health globally. High sodium intake is a primary driver of hypertension, or high blood pressure. This insidious condition often presents without overt symptoms, earning it the moniker, the silent killer. Yet, silently, it damages arteries, strains the heart, and dramatically increases the risk of stroke, heart attack, and kidney disease. The excess salt forces the kidneys to retain water, increasing blood volume and placing immense pressure on the cardiovascular system. Over time, this constant strain weakens blood vessels, narrows arteries, and can lead to irreversible damage to vital organs. Kidney function itself is directly impacted. The kidneys work tirelessly to filter waste and regulate the body's fluid and electrolyte balance. A consistently high salt diet overburdens these essential organs, contributing to chronic kidney disease, a progressive loss of kidney function that can eventually require dialysis or transplantation. Beyond these major cardiovascular and renal risks, research continues to explore links between high salt intake and other conditions, including gastric cancer and osteoporosis. The paradox is stark. The very substance that makes life possible, the essential mineral without which our bodies fail, now contributes significantly to the modern world's most prevalent chronic diseases. From ancient scarcity that ignited wars and migrations, to modern abundance that fuels a silent epidemic, humanity's relationship with salt remains fraught with profound implications for survival and disease. This is the silent scourge in its newest form, no longer a lack, but a pervasive presence, a testament to the powerful double-edged nature of this fundamental compound. We have mastered its extraction and distribution, but perhaps not yet its judicious consumption. The fight for salt continues not on battlefields, but in the quiet choices of daily life, and the unseen physiological responses within each of us. The quiet choices of daily life, and the unseen physiological responses within each of us, form only one chapter in the long saga of salt. For millennia, this simple mineral has not merely sustained life, it has also sculpted civilizations, determined the fate of nations, and ignited wars. Before refrigeration, before modern industry, salt was power. It was the ultimate preserver, allowing food to be stored for months, fueling armies, sustaining populations through lean seasons, and enabling distant trade. Its control was not just economic, it was an existential imperative. Across vast landscapes and through shifting epochs, empires rise and fall on the strength of their resources. Among the most vital yet often overlooked is salt. Its unique properties made it indispensable for human survival, economic stability, and military might. The strategic importance of salt mines, salt flats, and coastal evaporators elevated these locations to highly coveted territories, worth fighting for, worth dying for. In ancient China, the salt gabelle, a state monopoly on salt production and distribution, became the bedrock of imperial finance. As early as the Han Dynasty, more than 2,000 years ago, the government recognized salt's potential to fund vast armies, construct monumental infrastructure projects like the Great Wall, and maintain a sprawling bureaucracy. Officials meticulously controlled salt extraction from inland mines and coastal evaporation ponds. The revenues were immense, yet so too was the resentment. The salt tax disproportionately burdened the poor, sparking numerous rebellions throughout Chinese history, movements that often began with calls for relief from the oppressive gabelle. The right to control salt production was a constant struggle between central authority and local warlords, a critical lever in the ongoing contest for national power. Far to the west, the Roman Empire understood salt's military value firsthand. Roman soldiers, disciplined and well-fed, relied on salt for their rations. The Via Salaria, the Salt Road, winds its way from the salt pans of Ostia on the Mediterranean coast, into the heart of Rome, a testament to the essential nature of this commodity. Legend holds that Roman soldiers sometimes received a portion of their pay in salt, giving rise to the word salary from the Latin salarium. While the direct payment in salt is debated by historians, the underlying truth is clear. Salt was as valuable as coinage, a vital component of a soldier's sustenance and a legion's operational capacity. Control of salt mines and coastal saltworks was paramount for feeding the vast Roman armies and ensuring the stability of its far-flung provinces. Medieval Europe saw similar patterns emerge. Venice, the mercantile republic, built much of its maritime empire on the back of salt. Controlling the lucrative salt trade routes across the Adriatic Sea and into the European hinterland, Venetian merchants dictated prices and amassed enormous wealth. Their sleek galleys, laden with white crystals, were not just vessels of commerce. They were instruments of strategic power. Venice used its salt monopoly as a diplomatic tool, sometimes granting favored trading partners preferential access, other times withholding supply to exert political pressure. Their dominance was a source of constant friction, leading to numerous skirmishes and even full-blown wars with rival city-states and emerging land powers seeking their own access to this precious commodity. In the heart of Central Europe, the Habsburg Empire derived immense wealth from the vast salt mines of the Salzkammergut region, literally meaning salt chamber goods. These ancient mines, worked for thousands of years, provided a steady, controllable source of income that sustained royal treasuries for centuries. The production, sale, and taxation of salt were state prerogatives, enabling monarchs to maintain armies and project power across a vast, multi-ethnic empire. Perhaps nowhere was the political explosiveness of salt more evident than in France. The infamous gabelle, the French salt tax, was among the most hated and inequitable taxes in pre-revolutionary France. It was not a uniform tax across the entire kingdom. Some regions were exempt, others paid vastly different rates. This created a thriving black market for salt, with smugglers risking their lives to transport contraband salt from low-tax areas to high-tax ones. The brutal enforcement of the gabelle, with severe penalties for evasion, fueled widespread resentment. Historians often point to the gabelle as a major contributing factor to the widespread discontent that ultimately ignited the French Revolution, a vivid demonstration of how the strategic control and taxation of an essential resource could destabilize an entire nation. The 18th and 19th centuries witnessed salt's strategic role continue to manifest in explicit military conflicts. The American Civil War provides a stark illustration of salt as a weapon and a target. The Union blockade of the Confederate States aimed to cripple the South's ability to wage war, and among its primary targets were the Confederacy's salt works. Salt was essential for preserving meat to feed soldiers, for curing hides to make leather, and even for producing gunpowder. With limited access to northern salt sources, the Confederacy invested heavily in protecting its coastal salt evaporators and inland brine springs. Union forces, in turn, conducted repeated raids to destroy these facilities, understanding that depriving the South of salt would directly impair its ability to sustain its armies and feed its civilian population. The destruction of salt works was considered a legitimate and highly effective act of war. Further abroad, the British Empire's control over salt production in India became a symbol of colonial oppression. The Salt Act imposed a monopoly on salt production and distribution, forcing Indians to buy expensive, heavily taxed British salt, even though India possessed abundant natural salt sources. Mahatma Gandhi's iconic Salt March in 1930, a nonviolent protest against this injustice, powerfully demonstrated how deeply salt's strategic and economic grip permeated societies, even serving as a catalyst for independence movements against imperial rule. The act of gathering salt, simple and fundamental, became an act of defiance, a challenge to the very legitimacy of colonial power. Even into the 20th century, salt continued to shape geopolitical boundaries. Disputes over access to salt deposits influenced border negotiations and regional power struggles in various parts of the world, from the arid regions of Africa to the ancient salt lakes of Central Asia. While the overt salt wars of old, fought solely for control of a brine spring or a salt flat, have largely faded from memory, replaced by conflicts over oil, water, or rare earth minerals, salt's foundational role in human history remains undeniable. Its unique properties once made it the indispensable commodity, a cornerstone of empire building. The ability to preserve food, to sustain armies, and to generate vast wealth from its trade and taxation, made salt a strategic imperative for any aspiring power. From the Han Dynasty's salt gabelle to the French Revolution's inciting gabelle, from Roman legions to the American Civil War battlefields, the forgotten wars fought over salt shaped the maps of empires and the destinies of nations. While modern technologies have diminished its direct military significance, the intricate web of economic and political power woven around this crystalline foundation endures as a profound legacy. The enduring legacy of salt extends beyond its economic power and political influence. It encompasses a more brutal chapter in human conflict, the deliberate weaponization of this vital mineral, transforming it from a commodity of survival into an instrument of devastation. This is the salted earth policy, an ancient strategy rooted in the denial of sustenance and the crippling of an enemy's very capacity to endure. The phrase itself conjures images of scorched land, of fields rendered barren, of a future denied. While the most famous instance, the Roman salting of Carthage after its destruction in the Punic Wars, is largely considered a symbolic act or even a myth, its enduring power speaks to a profound truth. The idea that one could so thoroughly devastate an enemy, not merely by conquest but by obliterating their ability to rebuild, by poisoning their very soil, resonates through history. Whether literal or metaphorical, the intention is clear: to erase, to deny, to permanently incapacitate. It speaks to a level of total war, a desire to leave no possibility of resurgence. In an age before refrigeration, salt was food itself, or rather, the means by which food could be kept. Without salt, armies could not march for long. Their preserved rations would putrefy. Without salt, populations faced famine, their stored harvests succumbing to decay. To control salt was to control life, and therefore to deny it was to inflict a slow, agonizing death. Military strategists understood this acutely. A fortified city under siege might withstand assaults, but it could not withstand the absence of salt indefinitely. The human body requires salt for survival, for nerve function, for fluid balance. Deprive a population of it, and weakness, disease, and eventually collapse become inevitable. Consider the desperate struggles during sieges throughout the medieval world. Walls might hold against battering rams and catapults, but the internal clock of a city under siege ticked with the dwindling supplies of provisions. Among these, salt was often as crucial as grain or fresh water. Garrison commanders knew that without salt, their meat supplies would rot, their soldiers would grow weak and prone to illness, their morale would plummet. Tales from the Crusades, for example, often recount the severe privations faced by both besiegers and besieged, where the absence of vital commodities like salt could turn the tide of battle more effectively than any weapon. The strategic denial of salt could break a city's will to resist long before its walls were breached. Beyond direct sieges, the disruption of salt trade routes became a powerful economic weapon, especially in regions heavily reliant on imported salt. In the vast, landlocked interiors of continents, where local salt sources were scarce, entire economies hinged on its distant acquisition. Raiding parties, blockades, and piracy often targeted these precious shipments. A kingdom that could cut off its rival's salt supply could cripple its economy, undermine its military, and sow widespread discontent among its populace, all without firing a single arrow. This was an early form of economic warfare, a precursor to modern embargoes and sanctions, where a fundamental resource became the choke point, dictating the fates of nations. The wars fought over salt were not always pitched battles for a salt mine. They were often campaigns of attrition, designed to starve an enemy of this essential mineral. In ancient China, for instance, a state might control its own salt production, but disrupting the access of a rival state to its own sources or trade networks could be a devastating tactic. The Han Dynasty, with its state monopoly on salt, understood its power both as a revenue source and as a strategic asset. Any rebellion or rival power would invariably find its access to this vital commodity restricted, a direct consequence of the state's central control, turning a fiscal policy into a military advantage. The very geography of salt production often dictated military strategy. Coastal salt pans, easily accessible but vulnerable, became prizes to be defended or destroyed. Inland salt mines, often deep and defensible, could become formidable strongholds. Armies would march for days, sometimes weeks, to seize or destroy a rival's salt works, understanding that such an act could deliver a blow more crippling than a lost battle. The destruction of a salt works meant not just the loss of current supply, but often the long-term disruption of an entire region's ability to produce or acquire salt, leaving a lasting scar on its economic and social fabric. It was an attack on the foundational infrastructure of a society. Even the environment itself was sometimes weaponized. In arid regions, access to salt licks or salt flats was critical for both human and animal populations. Nomadic tribes, often reliant on seasonal migrations to these areas, could be devastated by military actions that denied them this access. Armies would pollute water sources with salt, or otherwise render crucial salt-rich areas unusable, effectively creating no-go zones that strangled the lifeblood of an enemy. This was a form of environmental warfare long before the term existed, a deliberate act to make the land uninhabitable or unsustainable for a foe, compelling displacement or surrender. During the American Civil War, salt again emerged as a crucial strategic resource. The Union blockade of Confederate ports aimed to cut off the South's access to manufactured goods and essential commodities, and salt was high on that list. The Confederacy, rich in agricultural land, struggled desperately for salt to preserve its meat and sustain its armies. Salt works along the coast, like those in Saltville, Virginia, became vital targets. Battles were fought directly over these sites. Union forces understood that destroying these facilities or cutting off their supply lines was paramount to weakening the Confederate war effort. A lack of salt meant the inability to provision troops, leading to widespread sickness and desertion. It meant a civilian population struggling with food preservation, exacerbating hardship and undermining morale. The battle for salt was often a battle for the very survival of the Confederate cause. The impact of salt denial was not confined to military camps. It rippled through the civilian population. Imagine a village cut off from its salt supply. The daily rhythm of life, so dependent on this mineral, would grind to a halt. Food preservation, a necessity for surviving harsh winters or lean times, would become impossible. Smoked meats and dried fish, staples that could see communities through lean seasons, would spoil. The very act of preparing meals would change, with food becoming bland, unappetizing, and less nutritious. Livestock, needing salt for health, would sicken and die, further depleting food sources and economic stability. The human body, deprived of its essential electrolytes, would grow weak, making people susceptible to disease and less capable of labor. Children, the elderly, and the infirm would suffer most acutely. This deliberate act of resource denial effectively waged war on the entire populace, eroding their will and capacity to support their government or army, transforming a strategic military objective into a widespread humanitarian crisis. Beyond the immediate physical effects, the psychological toll of salt deprivation was immense. The gnawing hunger for salt, known as salt craving, can be intense and disorienting. It breeds desperation and despair. A population under such pressure, watching their food spoil and their bodies weaken, becomes a population susceptible to surrender, rebellion, or flight. The salted earth policy, in essence, aimed to break the spirit as much as the body, creating a pervasive sense of hopelessness that could erode resistance more surely than any siege weapon, planting the seeds of internal collapse. This strategy, the salted earth policy, demonstrates a profound understanding of the interconnectedness of human survival and specific natural resources. It reveals that warfare is not merely about pitched battles and territorial gains, but also about the systematic dismantling of an enemy's ability to live, to thrive, and to resist. The act of denying salt was a long-term strategy, an investment in the prolonged suffering and eventual collapse of an adversary. It was a grim testament to the fact that power, even in its most destructive forms, often finds its roots in the control of the most basic elements of life. The echoes of this strategy resonate into the present day, albeit with different resources. While modern armies rarely fight directly over salt mines, the principles of resource denial remain central to contemporary conflict. Energy resources, fresh water, strategic minerals, and even access to critical technologies are today's equivalents of salt, commodities whose denial can cripple economies and undermine national security. The historical precedent of salt's weaponization serves as a stark reminder that the fundamental drivers of conflict often revolve around the most essential requirements for human civilization. The forgotten wars over salt, therefore, were not just about possession. They were also about destruction. They were about the deliberate act of rendering an enemy incapable of existence by targeting the very foundation of their sustenance. From the symbolic salting of ancient battlefields to the pragmatic destruction of salt works, the story of salt and warfare reveals a relentless and often brutal pursuit of victory through the control and denial of this unassuming yet utterly indispensable mineral. Its history is etched not just in trade routes and tax ledgers, but also in the desperate pleas of starving populations and the strategic calculations of commanders seeking to dismantle an enemy from within. The legacy of salt as a weapon, a tool of attrition, is a somber one. It illustrates how profoundly human societies have understood and manipulated their environment to gain an advantage, even if that advantage came at the cost of immense suffering. The salted earth policy, whether literal or purely metaphorical, represents a dark chapter in the history of human conflict, a testament to the lengths to which humanity has gone in its struggle for dominance, leveraging the very substance of life as an instrument of death. It underscores the vital importance of understanding our historical relationship with fundamental resources, for their power to both build and destroy remains eternal and unchanging. Yet, the eternal and unchanging power of fundamental resources, like salt, often manifests not in grand sweeping battles for entire nations, but in the gritty, relentless struggles fought on the very edges of continents. Here, along the saline shores, where the ocean yields its most precious gift, different kinds of conflicts emerge. These are the forgotten wars, fought not for gold or land in the traditional sense, but for the stark white crystals that mean life itself. From ancient estuaries to sprawling modern salt flats, these coastal zones represent crucial points of extraction. They are places where the sun, the wind, and the relentless cycle of tides conspire to create a treasure. For millennia, human communities cluster around these unique environments, mastering the delicate art of coaxing salt from seawater. They build intricate networks of evaporation ponds, dikes, and channels, transforming vast stretches of coastline into industrial landscapes dedicated to this singular purpose. These salt makers, these guardians of the saline shores, become indispensable. Their labor feeds empires and sustains populations, yet their strategic importance often renders them vulnerable, placing them directly in the path of conflict. Consider the Mediterranean, a cradle of civilization and a vibrant highway of trade. For the burgeoning Roman Republic and later its expansive empire, salt from coastal marshes and lagoons is not merely a commodity, it is a strategic imperative. The Via Salaria, the ancient salt road, famously carries the vital mineral inland from the Adriatic coast, a testament to its necessity. But before it reaches the legions or the markets of Rome, this salt must first be secured. Control over coastal salterns becomes a recurring flashpoint. Rival city-states and burgeoning naval powers vie for dominance over these productive zones. A harbor might fall, a city might burn, not for its temples or its treasury, but for the shallow, shimmering pools where salt crystallizes. Naval skirmishes are fought, land garrisons established, all to protect the slow, steady process of salt harvesting and its subsequent transport. The Carthaginian wars, though largely focused on broader geopolitical control, implicitly involved the struggle for resource access, including the salt that provisions armies and cures fish, a staple for long sea voyages. The variability to sustain protracted military campaigns depends on secure salt supplies, often sourced from these vulnerable coastal regions. Across the vast expanse of the Asian continent, along the expansive coastlines of ancient China, the story echoes with similar intensity. Here, the production of salt from seawater is an enterprise of staggering scale and antiquity. Imperial dynasties, recognizing the immense revenue potential and the critical importance of salt to their vast populace, established strict state monopolies. Coastal salt marshes become highly regulated territories, their output meticulously controlled and taxed. But such control inevitably breeds friction. Local populations who have for generations relied on the free gathering of salt from the sea, suddenly find their livelihoods criminalized. Smuggling rings proliferate, growing into powerful organized forces that challenge imperial authority. These are not always formal wars with declared combatants and battle lines, but rather persistent, often violent clashes between imperial forces and illicit salt traders. Coastal garrisons are strengthened, patrols intensify, and harsh penalties are meted out. Rebellions, sometimes reaching immense proportions, are fueled by popular resentment over salt taxation and restricted access. The Inlushan Rebellion, one of the most devastating conflicts in Chinese history, though sparked by political rivalries, is exacerbated by the economic instability that salt monopolies and their associated corruption help create. The control of coastal salt fields and the waterways that transport their precious cargo remains a central concern for every ruling dynasty, shaping both internal policy and external defense strategies. Moving to medieval Europe, the control of saline shores proves equally decisive. The maritime republics of Venice and Genoa, fierce rivals for centuries, understood implicitly that mastery of trade routes included dominion over critical commodities. Salt is paramount among these. Venice, in particular, leverages its control over the lucrative salt pans of Chioggia and its influence over other Adriatic salt sources, to build its immense wealth and naval power. The War of Chioggia in the late 14th century, a pivotal conflict between Venice and Genoa, is fought not solely for territorial dominance but significantly for economic supremacy, where salt trade routes and production sites are crucial strategic assets. Genoese efforts to cripple Venetian trade include attempts to seize or disrupt salt shipments, while Venice vigorously defends its sources and distribution networks. Similar skirmishes play out along other European coastlines. The Bay of Bourgneuf on the Atlantic coast of France, with its vast salt marshes, becomes a coveted prize. English raids during the Hundred Years' War often target these productive salt zones, seeking to deny vital resources to the French crown and its subjects. The defense of these salt marshes, often by local militias and small garrisons, becomes a vital part of regional warfare. The very landscape, carved into geometric patterns of salt pans, transforms into a defensive fortification, its waterways and dikes serving as natural barriers. The pursuit of coastal salt sometimes transcends mere conflict and becomes an instrument of long-term economic subjugation. Colonial powers, understanding the deep dependency on this essential mineral, seize control of indigenous salt production sites in distant lands. In India, the vast coastal salt flats become a primary target for British control. The infamous salt tax, a draconian measure designed to generate revenue and eliminate local competition, stifles traditional salt makers and drives widespread hardship. While Gandhi's Salt March in the 20th century is a non-violent protest, it fundamentally challenges the British monopoly over coastal salt, highlighting centuries of simmering resentment and economic warfare waged through control of saline shores. It vividly illustrates how the strategic capture of these unique geographical features can exert immense power over a populace, reducing them to economic servitude. These coastal conflicts, often overshadowed by grander battles for cities or kingdoms, are no less significant in their impact. They are wars fought not with thunderous cannons or sweeping cavalry charges, but with an intimate understanding of the environment and a fierce determination to control its most basic bounty. The guardians of the saline shores, from anonymous Roman salt makers to defiant Chinese villagers, stand as silent witnesses to humanity's unending struggle for survival and dominance. Their stories, etched into the very landscapes they defended, remind us that the most vital resources often hide in plain sight, their power to provoke conflict as enduring as the tides themselves. The shimmering, sun-baked flats, seemingly tranquil, conceal a history steeped in desperate defense, bitter rivalry, and the relentless pursuit of one of the Earth's simplest yet most profound treasures. The pursuit of salt extends far beyond the sun-baked flats and contested coastlines. It permeates the everyday lives of ordinary people, manifesting as a persistent, often invisible struggle for survival and dignity. This is a battlefield without armies or flags, where the enemy is scarcity, distance, or the heavy hand of economic control. For countless generations, this simple necessity shapes economies, dictates migrations, and defines the very fabric of human existence. It is a constant, grinding pressure, a silent war fought in kitchens, marketplaces, and on arduous journeys. Life itself hinges on this humble mineral. The human body requires salt for nerve function, muscle contraction, and maintaining proper fluid balance. Without it, weakness sets in, followed by debilitating cramps, confusion, and eventually, a collapse of vital systems. Livestock, crucial for agriculture and transportation, also depend on regular salt intake. For communities far from coastal areas or inland salt deposits, the quest for this essential nutrient becomes a daily preoccupation. Imagine a world where every meal lacks flavor, where every laborer feels the slow drain of energy, where livestock risks illness. This is the reality for millions throughout history, a constant reminder of salt's profound importance. In ancient Rome, legionaries received part of their wages in salt, a practice giving rise to the word salary. This highlights not only salt's value but also its scarcity for those not directly involved in its production or trade. For the common citizen, salt is not merely a seasoning but a preservative, essential for curing meats and fish, allowing food to last through lean seasons. When supplies dwindle or prices soar, the specter of famine looms larger. The daily bread, if available, remains bland without salt. The salt cellar on the table becomes a symbol of household prosperity, its emptiness a stark indicator of hardship. The Roman state controls salt production and sale, using it as a tool for taxation and social control, directly impacting the daily budgets of its citizens. Across medieval Europe, the control of salt routes and sources fuels immense wealth and power for cities like Venice, which establishes a lucrative monopoly over Adriatic salt. For inland communities, acquiring salt is an expensive and dangerous undertaking. Merchants transport salt along dedicated routes, known as salt roads, often traveling vast distances over treacherous mountain passes and through bandit-ridden forests. Every village along these routes imposes tolls, further inflating the price. The common person pays dearly for every grain. Salt becomes a luxury item in many areas, rationed carefully, often consumed only by the wealthy, while the poor struggle with bland diets and the health consequences of deficiency. The trade itself is a testament to the daily desperation for this vital commodity, a constant flow of caravans braving the elements to deliver salt to a hungry continent. Beyond direct sieges, the disruption of salt trade routes became a powerful economic weapon, especially in regions heavily reliant on imported salt. In the vast, landlocked interiors of continents, where local salt sources were scarce, entire economies hinged on its distant acquisition. Raiding parties, blockades, and piracy often targeted these precious shipments. A kingdom that could cut off its rival's salt supply could cripple its economy, undermine its military, and sow widespread discontent among its populace, all without firing a single arrow. This was an early form of economic warfare, a precursor to modern embargoes and sanctions, where a fundamental resource became the choke point, dictating the fates of nations. The wars fought over salt were not always pitched battles for a salt mine. They were often campaigns of attrition, designed to starve an enemy of this essential mineral. In ancient China, for instance, a state might control its own salt production, but disrupting the access of a rival state to its own sources or trade networks could be a devastating tactic. The Han Dynasty, with its state monopoly on salt, understood its power both as a revenue source and as a strategic asset. Any rebellion or rival power would invariably find its access to this vital commodity restricted, a direct consequence of the state's central control, turning a fiscal policy into a military advantage. The very geography of salt production often dictated military strategy. Coastal salt pans, easily accessible but vulnerable, became prizes to be defended or destroyed. Inland salt mines, often deep and defensible, could become formidable strongholds. Armies would march for days, sometimes weeks, to seize or destroy a rival's salt works, understanding that such an act could deliver a blow more crippling than a lost battle. The destruction of a salt works meant not just the loss of current supply, but often the long-term disruption of an entire region's ability to produce or acquire salt, leaving a lasting scar on its economic and social fabric. It was an attack on the foundational infrastructure of a society. Even the environment itself was sometimes weaponized. In arid regions, access to salt licks or salt flats was critical for both human and animal populations. Nomadic tribes, often reliant on seasonal migrations to these areas, could be devastated by military actions that denied them this access. Armies would pollute water sources with salt, or otherwise render crucial salt-rich areas unusable, effectively creating no-go zones that strangled the lifeblood of an enemy. This was a form of environmental warfare long before the term existed, a deliberate act to make the land uninhabitable or unsustainable for a foe, compelling displacement or surrender. During the American Civil War, salt again emerged as a crucial strategic resource. The Union blockade of Confederate ports aimed to cut off the South's access to manufactured goods and essential commodities, and salt was high on that list. The Confederacy, rich in agricultural land, struggled desperately for salt to preserve its meat and sustain its armies. Salt works along the coast, like those in Saltville, Virginia, became vital targets. Battles were fought directly over these sites. Union forces understood that destroying these facilities or cutting off their supply lines was paramount to weakening the Confederate war effort. A lack of salt meant the inability to provision troops, leading to widespread sickness and desertion. It meant a civilian population struggling with food preservation, exacerbating hardship and undermining morale. The battle for salt was often a battle for the very survival of the Confederate cause. The impact of salt denial was not confined to military camps. It rippled through the civilian population. Imagine a village cut off from its salt supply. The daily rhythm of life, so dependent on this mineral, would grind to a halt. Food preservation, a necessity for surviving harsh winters or lean times, would become impossible. Smoked meats and dried fish, staples that could see communities through lean seasons, would spoil. The very act of preparing meals would change, with food becoming bland, unappetizing, and less nutritious. Livestock, needing salt for health, would sicken and die, further depleting food sources and economic stability. The human body, deprived of its essential electrolytes, would grow weak, making people susceptible to disease and less capable of labor. Children, the elderly, and the infirm would suffer most acutely. This deliberate act of resource denial effectively waged war on the entire populace, eroding their will and capacity to support their government or army, transforming a strategic military objective into a widespread humanitarian crisis. Beyond the immediate physical effects, the psychological toll of salt deprivation was immense. The gnawing hunger for salt, known as salt craving, can be intense and disorienting. It breeds desperation and despair. A population under such pressure, watching their food spoil and their bodies weaken, becomes a population susceptible to surrender, rebellion, or flight. The salted earth policy, in essence, aimed to break the spirit as much as the body, creating a pervasive sense of hopelessness that could erode resistance more surely than any siege weapon, planting the seeds of internal collapse. This strategy, the salted earth policy, demonstrates a profound understanding of the interconnectedness of human survival and specific natural resources. It reveals that warfare is not merely about pitched battles and territorial gains, but also about the systematic dismantling of an enemy's ability to live, to thrive, and to resist. The act of denying salt was a long-term strategy, an investment in the prolonged suffering and eventual collapse of an adversary. It was a grim testament to the fact that power, even in its most destructive forms, often finds its roots in the control of the most basic elements of life. Further afield, the great salt caravans of the Sahara represent an epic daily struggle against nature itself. For centuries, Tuareg and other nomadic peoples extract salt from vast, ancient deposits like those in Todeni, Mali. These slabs of rock salt, sometimes weighing over 100 pounds each, are then loaded onto camels for journeys lasting weeks or even months across the scorching desert. The caravans traverse hundreds of miles of shifting sands, guided by ancient knowledge of stars and faint landmarks. The value of this salt in West African markets, particularly in cities like Timbuktu, is immense, often traded pound for pound with gold. But the journey itself is a brutal testament to the human will to survive and thrive. Many perish along the way from thirst, heatstroke, or bandit attacks. Every caravan represents not just trade, but a life-or-death mission for entire communities. In Imperial China, the state's monopoly on salt production and distribution is one of its oldest and most effective methods of taxation. Salt gabelle, or salt tax, becomes a foundational pillar of the imperial treasury for over 2 millennia. This tight control means that salt, a universal necessity, is often prohibitively expensive for the common peasant. Black markets flourish, with smugglers risking severe penalties, including execution, to provide cheaper salt to desperate villagers. Local rebellions, though sometimes sparked by broader grievances, frequently find their roots in the oppressive cost and scarcity of salt. Families often choose between buying salt for food preservation or affording other basic necessities. The decision is stark, impacting daily health and economic stability. The imperial system, designed to enrich the state, inadvertently creates a perpetual daily struggle for its most vulnerable citizens. Centuries later, on the Indian subcontinent, the British Raj imposes a heavy tax on indigenous salt production and imports, forcing Indians to buy expensive, often imported, British salt. This act denies millions of the poorest access to an essential dietary component, driving countless families into severe hardship and impacting a nation's health. Though the struggle culminates famously in Mahatma Gandhi's Salt March of 1930, the daily indignities and suffering caused by the tax precede it for decades. Fishermen cannot salt their catches, farmers struggle to preserve harvests, and the diet of the common person becomes deficient and monotonous. The inability to freely gather or produce salt, a gift of nature, transforms into a symbol of colonial oppression, touching every household and every meal. Even in remote regions of South America, the struggle for salt shapes traditional ways of life. High in the Andes, indigenous communities, far from modern infrastructure, continue ancient practices of salt gathering. They trek for days or weeks to remote salt pans, often at dizzying altitudes, to chip away blocks of salt from saline springs or deposits. These blocks are then carried back on the backs of people or llamas, an arduous journey over rugged terrain. The effort required is immense, and the yield often just enough for the community's immediate needs, with a small surplus for trade. This is not about market speculation or imperial control, but a direct, physical battle against geography and the elements to secure survival. The knowledge of these salt routes and sources is passed down through generations, a testament to the enduring daily challenge. Today, while direct salt wars are rare, the invisible battlefield persists in new forms. In developing nations and remote areas, access to affordable, clean salt remains a challenge. Poverty limits purchasing power, making even subsidized salt a strain on meager incomes. Transport logistics to isolated communities still drive up prices, mirroring the struggles of medieval Europe or ancient trade routes. The daily reality for some still involves difficult choices between salt and other necessities. Furthermore, global food systems, while making salt widely available, also introduce new challenges. The push for iodized salt to combat iodine deficiency represents a modern public health campaign, a silent battle against unseen illnesses that once plagued populations due to lack of a trace mineral delivered through salt. The underground trade in salt, though less common today, reflects the profound demand when supply is restricted. Historically, when governments imposed heavy taxes or monopolies, clandestine networks emerged to meet the desperate need for affordable salt. Smugglers operated under the cover of darkness, risking their lives to bring this precious commodity to those who could not afford official prices. These salt bandits were often seen as heroes by the common people, providing a lifeline against oppressive systems. This hidden economy, driven by the basic human need for survival, underscores the extent to which society values salt. It is a testament to the fact that even the most mundane items can ignite fierce determination and elicit enterprise when their access is denied. Ultimately, the true cost of salt transcends its market price. It is measured in the sweat of caravan traders, the arduous journeys of mountain dwellers, the suffering of families under oppressive taxes, and the ingenuity of smugglers. This constant, pervasive struggle for salt is not always recorded in history books as major conflicts, but its impact on human civilization is undeniable. It shapes dietary habits, influences agricultural practices, determines settlement patterns, and drives food preservation innovation. The unseen battlefield, therefore, is an intimate ledger of human resilience and vulnerability. It is a story etched into every pinch of salt, a reminder that the simplest elements often hold the deepest power. The journey from scarcity to accessibility is a long and often painful one, illustrating how a humble mineral shapes destinies and defines the quiet, enduring battles fought in the rhythm of everyday life. This ongoing quest, largely invisible to those in modern abundance, remains a fundamental driver of human behavior and a testament to the persistent struggle for a balanced, nourishing existence. The silent narratives of this struggle continue to unfold, a constant echo of humanity's profound connection to the Earth's basic gifts. The echoes of this strategy resonate into the present day, albeit with different resources. While modern armies rarely fight directly over salt mines, the principles of resource denial remain central to contemporary conflict. Energy resources, fresh water, strategic minerals, and even access to critical technologies are today's equivalents of salt, commodities whose denial can cripple economies and undermine national security. The historical precedent of salt's weaponization serves as a stark reminder that the fundamental drivers of conflict often revolve around the most essential requirements for human civilization. The forgotten wars over salt, therefore, were not just about possession. They were also about destruction. They were about the deliberate act of rendering an enemy incapable of existence by targeting the very foundation of their sustenance. From the symbolic salting of ancient battlefields to the pragmatic destruction of salt works, the story of salt and warfare reveals a relentless and often brutal pursuit of victory through the control and denial of this unassuming yet utterly indispensable mineral. Its history is etched not just in trade routes and tax ledgers, but also in the desperate pleas of starving populations and the strategic calculations of commanders seeking to dismantle an enemy from within. The legacy of salt as a weapon, a tool of attrition, is a somber one. It illustrates how profoundly human societies have understood and manipulated their environment to gain an advantage, even if that advantage came at the cost of immense suffering. The salted earth policy, whether literal or purely metaphorical, represents a dark chapter in the history of human conflict, a testament to the lengths to which humanity has gone in its struggle for dominance, leveraging the very substance of life as an instrument of death. It underscores the vital importance of understanding our historical relationship with fundamental resources, for their power to both build and destroy remains eternal and unchanging. Yet, the eternal and unchanging power of fundamental resources, like salt, often manifests not in grand sweeping battles for entire nations, but in the gritty, relentless struggles fought on the very edges of continents. Here, along the saline shores, Where the ocean yields its most precious gift, different kinds of conflicts emerge. These are the forgotten wars, fought not for gold or land in the traditional sense, but for the stark white crystals that mean life itself. From ancient estuaries to sprawling modern salt flats, these coastal zones represent crucial points of extraction. They are places where the sun, the wind, and the relentless cycle of tides conspire to create a treasure. For millennia, human communities cluster around these unique environments, mastering the delicate art of coaxing salt from seawater. They build intricate networks of evaporation ponds, dikes, and channels, transforming vast stretches of coastline into industrial landscapes dedicated to this singular purpose. These salt makers, these guardians of the saline shores, become indispensable. Their labor feeds empires and sustains populations, yet their strategic importance often renders them vulnerable, placing them directly in the path of conflict. Consider the Mediterranean, a cradle of civilization and a vibrant highway of trade. For the burgeoning Roman Republic and later its expansive empire, salt from coastal marshes and lagoons is not merely a commodity, it is a strategic imperative. The Via Salaria, the ancient salt road, famously carries the vital mineral inland from the Adriatic coast, a testament to its necessity. But before it reaches the legions or the markets of Rome, this salt must first be secured. Control over coastal salterns becomes a recurring flashpoint. Rival city-states and burgeoning naval powers vie for dominance over these productive zones. A harbor might fall, a city might burn, not for its temples or its treasury, but for the shallow, shimmering pools where salt crystallizes. Naval skirmishes are fought, land garrisons established, all to protect the slow, steady process of salt harvesting and its subsequent transport. The Carthaginian wars, though largely focused on broader geopolitical control, implicitly involved the struggle for resource access, including the salt that provisions armies and cures fish, a staple for long sea voyages. The variability to sustain protracted military campaigns depends on secure salt supplies, often sourced from these vulnerable coastal regions. Across the vast expanse of the Asian continent, along the expansive coastlines of ancient China, the story echoes with similar intensity. Here, the production of salt from seawater is an enterprise of staggering scale and antiquity. Imperial dynasties, recognizing the immense revenue potential and the critical importance of salt to their vast populace, established strict state monopolies. Coastal salt marshes become highly regulated territories, their output meticulously controlled and taxed. But such control inevitably breeds friction. Local populations who have for generations relied on the free gathering of salt from the sea, suddenly find their livelihoods criminalized. Smuggling rings proliferate, growing into powerful organized forces that challenge imperial authority. These are not always formal wars with declared combatants and battle lines, but rather persistent, often violent clashes between imperial forces and illicit salt traders. Coastal garrisons are strengthened, patrols intensify, and harsh penalties are meted out. Rebellions, sometimes reaching immense proportions, are fueled by popular resentment over salt taxation and restricted access. The Inlushan Rebellion, one of the most devastating conflicts in Chinese history, though sparked by political rivalries, is exacerbated by the economic instability that salt monopolies and their associated corruption help create. The control of coastal salt fields and the waterways that transport their precious cargo remains a central concern for every ruling dynasty, shaping both internal policy and external defense strategies. The battles for salt may have faded from active memory, yet their echoes resonate profoundly in the modern world. We taste them, we feel them, we are shaped by them, often without conscious realization. The deep-seated human connection to this mineral, forged in millennia of struggle and necessity, persists as a fundamental driver of our preferences, our economies, and even our health. The invisible wars over salt, once fought with steel and strategy, now manifest in subtler yet equally powerful forms. Today, salt is not a scarce commodity for most. It lines supermarket shelves in endless varieties, an inexpensive staple taken for granted. This abundance stands in stark contrast to a human history defined by its desperate pursuit. Yet, the primal craving for salt, etched into our very physiology, remains a powerful testament to its past scarcity and life-giving properties. Our bodies are ancient archives, holding the genetic memory of a time when every grain was precious. Evolution hardwired us to seek salt, a critical electrolyte essential for nerve function, muscle contraction, and fluid balance. This biological imperative, honed over millions of years, transcends mere taste. It is a fundamental need, a cellular memory of survival. Consider the allure of a perfectly seasoned meal. The satisfying crunch of sea salt on a fresh vegetable, the rich umami complexity it unlocks in a slow-cooked broth, the sharp contrast it offers to sweet flavors. This intricate dance of taste is not merely a culinary preference, it is a legacy. For centuries, salt's primary role was preservation, transforming perishable goods into enduring sustenance. Fish, meat, vegetables, all rendered safe and edible for long journeys or lean winters through the alchemy of salt curing. This necessity gave birth to an entire gastronomic tradition. Smoked salmon, prosciutto, fermented pickles, salted cod, these are not just dishes. They are edible monuments to the desperate need for food security and the ingenious use of salt to achieve it. As food preservation methods evolved beyond direct salting, humanity began to understand salt's secondary, yet equally potent, power, its ability to enhance flavor. It transforms bland ingredients, elevates existing tastes, and balances complex profiles. Without salt, many foods fall flat, losing their vibrancy and character. This reliance on salt as a flavor agent is a direct continuation of its historical importance. When salt was hard to get, its presence in a meal signified not just wealth, but careful preparation and value. To offer salted food was to offer a precious commodity, a gesture of hospitality rooted in scarcity. Today we sprinkle it without a second thought, yet the deep satisfaction it brings echoes that ancient appreciation. The salt routes, once arteries of commerce and contention, have largely been replaced by global supply chains. Yet, the ghost of these routes influences modern demographics and infrastructure. Cities that once thrived at salt sources or along vital trade paths retain their historical significance, often evolving into contemporary industrial or logistical hubs. The very geography of our modern world, the placement of towns and industries, often unknowingly reflects the ancient pull of this mineral. Major waterways, mountain passes, and coastal areas were historically critical for salt production and transport, and many remain centers of population and commerce today. Even the political landscape bears subtle marks of salt's past significance. Taxation of salt, a common practice throughout history, often fueled rebellions and solidified state power. The infamous gabelle in pre-revolutionary France, a deeply unpopular salt tax, directly contributed to widespread discontent. While overt salt taxes are rare in modern developed nations, the underlying principle of taxing essential commodities to generate state revenue persists. Governments still regulate, albeit less oppressively, the production and distribution of vital resources. The historical precedent set by salt taxation serves as a reminder of how deeply intertwined resource control and political stability have always been. The shift from salt scarcity to salt abundance has, however, brought new challenges, ushering in a different kind of salt war. No longer do nations fight over access to salt licks or coastal pans. Instead, the battleground shifts to public health. The widespread availability of cheap salt, coupled with the rise of industrial food processing, has led to a significant increase in dietary sodium intake. Health organizations around the globe now wage campaigns against excessive salt consumption, linking it to hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and other chronic conditions. This new conflict highlights a profound irony. The very mineral that once sustained life and fueled empires now poses a significant health risk when consumed in surplus. Processed foods, a cornerstone of the modern diet, are often laden with hidden salt. It acts not just as a flavor enhancer but also as a preservative, a texture agent, and a cheap way to mask blandness or poor quality ingredients. From breakfast cereals to frozen meals, from cured meats to baked goods, salt is ubiquitous. Consumers navigate a complex landscape of nutritional labels and health recommendations, struggling to moderate their intake in a food environment where salt is omnipresent. This represents a stark reversal of historical priorities. Where once humans expended immense energy to acquire salt, now they must actively work to reduce it from their diet. Despite this contemporary health debate, salt retains its fundamental allure. The human palate, refined over millennia to seek out and appreciate this vital mineral, still responds instinctively to its presence. Chefs worldwide continue to champion salt, not as a health threat, but as an indispensable tool for culinary artistry. They understand its profound ability to transform raw ingredients into sublime experiences, a wisdom passed down through generations. The craft of curing, fermenting, and seasoning remains a cherished tradition, connecting modern culinary practices to the ancient necessity of preservation. Beyond the kitchen, salt's influence extends into unexpected corners of modern life. It is crucial for industrial processes, from water purification and chemical manufacturing to de-icing roads in winter. Its applications are so diverse and fundamental that entire industries rely on its constant supply. The quiet, consistent flow of salt into these sectors is a testament to its enduring foundational importance, far beyond its role at the dinner table. It is an unseen force shaping the very infrastructure of our industrialized society. In some cultures, salt continues to hold symbolic and ritualistic power, a quiet echo of its historical reverence. It is used in religious ceremonies, blessings, and traditional medicine, signifying purity, protection, or a bond. A pinch of salt over the shoulder for good luck, the offering of bread and salt to guests as a sign of welcome, the use of salt in exorcisms. These practices, though perhaps less common today, are fragments of an ancient understanding of salt's almost mystical properties. They remind us that for much of human history, salt was more than just a mineral. It was a sacred substance, imbued with powerful meaning. The enduring legacy of salt, therefore, is multifaceted. It resides in our biological imperative to seek it, a deep craving rooted in evolutionary survival. It shapes our culinary traditions, from ancient preservation techniques to modern gastronomic artistry. It influences our health policies and the structure of our industrial food systems, creating new wars over its management. It subtly defines our geography and even our language, with terms like worth one salt reflecting its historical value. The forgotten wars over salt may no longer be fought with swords and shields, but their indelible marks persist, silently shaping the modern palate and the human experience. We live in a world built upon its once precious grains, a testament to the quiet yet profound power of salt.